Okay, here we have it in a little closer detail. Now, one of the things I call your attention to is the blood coming out of the back of the wrist. We'll see a little bit later why that is so true. In general, the weight of the body hanging on the cross is so tough with the angle of the hands out this way that if you put the nail in the palm of the hand, like most artists depict, there's nothing stopping it, and it will pull out of the flesh and would come off the cross. So the Romans were very good bone specialists. You know, they knew where to put the nail, and they put the nail through the bony part of the wrist. Very painful, because if you know how you hit your elbow on a door and how it stings, you know, that nerve goes all the way down through the wrist, and that's where they drove the nail. So when Christ is hanging on the cross and trying to breathe up and down, his hand is rotating around that horrible spike, around that nerve. You can imagine. I don't know how he lived 3 hours on the cross. I have no idea. Next slide, please. So here's the back, and you can see this probably closer when you come up and look at this. But what you see here are 120 horrible gouges in the flesh, where 2 floggers, each with a whip with 3 thongs of leather tipped by bone or little metal balls. So when they struck, they gouged out 3 rather violent, deep wounds. And striking 40 times by 3 thongs each, that's 120 scourges, and that's what you see on the back. And you will see it closer when you look up here. Next slide, please. So here we are with the whole front converted to the image that we're more familiar with. And I call your attention to the fact that those strips down either side of the body are not little footprints. One lady said, "What are those footprints there for?" They're actually burns from a fire in 1532. The cloth was folded up in a niche in the church, and they set fire to the church. There were some people who didn't like it, but they salvaged it just in time, and the only thing that happened is the molten silver on the casket melted through the cloth. If any of you have been welders, you know, and your wife will say, "Why do you always get holes in your clothes when you weld?" Because of sparks. The molten metal goes through the cloth and just vaporizes it, you know, leaves a big hole. So, and the other thing you can see is a water stain. There's a water stain right here. You see here, one right here, and there's one right here. And there's also one down here. And these are probably from when they were putting it out, they were sloshing water on it. But we know it's water stain because of the scientists have measured the stuff in it. But the other thing you can see, which is very interesting, is where the sword or where the spear went right through, right here. And we'll talk about that a little later. I have some more slides on that business. Okay, let's have the next slide. And here we go. Here's where you can see the 120 whip marks. Notice they're on his legs, on his back, on his shoulders here. And you can see a smudge across the shoulders here. See, here's the head right here. You can see the cap of thorns, the blood from the head. But here's where the beam was across the back. And you can see that the sores are kind of smooshed together because he was carrying, you know, going down the street like that. And that's why when he fell, he was tied to the beam. And when he fell forward, he tried to break his fall, but he slapped the ground with his face. And that's why you'll see on the picture, this face is swollen because he struck the pavement. Very painful. That's why they called in Joseph of Arimathea. Simon. You remember they called in another guy to carry the cross because they were afraid he'd die on the way. It's another little detail. If Christ had died on the way to crucifixion, one of the soldiers would have had to take his place and be crucified. Because once they announced crucifixion, somebody had to die. So that was why in Mel Gibson's picture, where they were whipping Christ all the way along the cross, that didn't happen. Because they were so carried away that he would die. Remember, they put his shirt on carefully. They didn't want him to go into shock. They didn't want him to die because they wanted to crucify him. So it was a deliberate keeping him alive till they could smash him. Terrible, but they knew what they were doing. Next slide, please. And here we are again, frontal view. And it's a little out of focus, but it gives you the dramatic picture of what Jesus would look like if you saw him tonight in the room with us. And you can see, if you look carefully, on the arms right here, you'll notice rivulets of blood. By the way, in the negative, the blood looks white, okay, because it's dark in the positive. And what you see is literally, you see the blood coming out of the nail wound here, right here, and you see it running. In other words, his arm's like this, the blood's coming out here, so it runs right down on the outside. And so when his hand is down like this, you see the blood coming from, and we'll show that closer too. You'll see it coming out of the spear wound, even more amazing. Let's see the next slide. There you go, there's the back image again. And again, you see all those scourge marks all over the body. Why he didn't die just from the scourging is amazing. Because it's a horrible, horrible way of torturing someone. Next slide, please. Now here we are again. The face on the left is what people saw for centuries. And yet they felt it was Christ, but that was a belief thing more than more than really something they could measure. But on the left, you'll see Christ, and you kind of wonder, when you see paintings of Christ, how come they all look alike? Did you ever wonder, where did artists get the idea for what Jesus looked like? And the answer is, right here, from the shroud. That's where it came from for all these years. Next slide, please. Yes, and this is why I say, with all due respect, this is such a beautiful picture that you can almost make a prayer out of simply looking and thinking and let it penetrate to your heart.